My name is Paul Menton. I come from Watertown, 77 years of age now. I was in World War II. I was in the United States Marine Corps. The only thing I remember about it real seriously is my serial number, 526309. I don't know how the heck you remember that after all these years, but they drilled it into us. I was in the Marine Corps in February 1943 to February of 1946. I served about 11 and a half months overseas in the South Pacific. I was born in Cambridge, in Somerville, and my family moved to Watertown. We lived up Main Street in Watertown, 669 Main Street, just up by the Gore Estate. I was the opening of the Brown School. I was in the kindergarten for the first year of the Brown School, and I went through elementary school there, and then went to the West Junior High School. And just an aside, I think one of the great things about being brought up in the Depression, at least for me, was that the Depression had a lot of, the WPA had a lot of activities, and one of the activities, they had orchestras and opera singers who used to go around to the schools. And I developed a great love, both in the elementary school and the West Junior High School, by listening to some of the WPA entertainers. And to this day, I love opera and I love classical music. Well, as a kid in Watertown, and it was a great place to grow up because it was country. And the old school system, you go to school, in the elementary school, you'd go from 8 o'clock in the morning until about noontime, and then you'd go home for lunch, and your mother would have lunch, and you'd then walk back to school. And it was great, but we grew up, and then you had then East Junior High School, or the West Junior High School. That was a full day. You were a big kid when you went there. And but at that time, we had a lot of sports, and there was every little neighborhood, like the west end of town, our end of town, the Longfellow Road down to, say, Hersom Street was a group of kids in that area, and we'd all play ball, have our teams, and then from Hersom Street down to about Lexington Street or down to Waverly Avenue, then another group of kids would have teams, and down the Bemis area, be another group of kids and have teams, and God, we had all sorts of, basketball. We didn't play much basketball, but football and baseball and hockey, and everyone played. Every kid in the neighborhood played, and if he had 2 left feet, you had to get 11 guys, and he played no matter what the hell it was. So we had a great time, and I've often thought that maybe some of the modern organized sports deprived a lot of kids of some of the activities they would have had. Oh yeah, when I was a group of us, we skipped school one day and went into town and saw the movie Wake Island, Byron Dunleavy, and fighting the Japanese, defending Wake Island. Right after that movie was over, the 4 of us went down and joined the Marine Corps. And as I stated, McCurley, McCamo, and Bob Durkin were all 18, and they were able to get right in. I wasn't of age, so I couldn't get in right away. So I got in later when I made a pest of myself in front of my father. But then I went down to Parris Island. And what an awakening that is for a young 17-year-old kid. I guess it's the same today. But at that time, it was actually an island. I've been down there since, and there's a causeway going out to it. It was an island, and you got off the train, and you put on a boxcar, and you're brought to the edge. And they put you on kind of a little boat, and they took you across. And get up there, and the first thing they did to you, they stripped you, took all the clothes away. They gave you a bag, put everything you own personal in that bag, and they said they're going to send that bag back to your parents, and they said, now everything you get is ours, and we own you, and they did. We went on there, we walked through a building, we had the hair completely naked, everyone was completely naked, and you walk through a building, and they cut your hair, standing on benches, you just walk through and they cut your hair, they send you through a delousing room, then they started giving you equipment and food. Equipment and clothes, buckets, brushes. They gave you your rifle, but it was all in cosmoline and grease. They gave you everything, and they finally marched you back to your barracks, and then all the time they're screaming and yelling. It was a horrible experience, and I've done much of my life to forget that experience. And from graduation, I was then shipped to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And at Camp Lejeune, for some reason, they trained me to become a radar technician. And radar was in its infancy at the time. And it was an altogether different thing that they have now. The tubes in the radar were as high as a man, and it was just a massive instrument. And the accuracy was poor to absolutely awful. And we trained in that for I don't know how long the school was. And then when we finished that, I was sent to Pearl Harbor. No, I was sent over to San Diego. We caught a boat at San Diego, and we didn't know where we were going, and we ended up in New Caledonia, which was a French island in the South Pacific. And we got off the boat, and the only thing I remember about New Caledonia was that there were so many Marines and servicemen around, and it was a French island, and the French, I guess, didn't trust that many servicemen around. And we were never allowed liberty. We were never allowed outside of the camp we were in. And we stayed there, I think, maybe a week or two. And we were shipped in. I was shipped in to the Solomon Islands in Bougainville. In Bougainville, thank God for me, most of the fighting was over, and I was sent in, and we were in anti-aircraft. And we stayed there for a short period of time, I don't remember how long. And then the outfit was sent back to Guadalcanal, and Guadalcanal had been secured. And we went there, we were training, and at that time the Marine Corps made a decision. I didn't make the decision, but they did, that the United States had air supremacy, so they disbanded all the Marine anti-aircraft outfits, and everyone in the Marine Corps, in the outfit, I was in the 3rd Defense Battalion, attached to which was part of the 3rd Amphibian Group. And they disbanded all the anti-aircraft, and everyone in my outfit went into the infantry. And all these fellows with me in the 3rd Defense Battalion ended up going into Tinian or Saipan or Guam, which was a horrible experience for them. For some reason, God was good to me, but for some reason, I had only been overseas about 11 months at the time, and I was sent back to the United States to go to school again. And they sent me back to the United States, to Camp Lejeune. And at Camp Lejeune, I was put in charge of a group of, I think it was about 12 other Marines. And they took away our rifles, and they gave us 45s, and they sent us out to an Army base, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And out in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, they sent us to school. And the school is something I never heard anyone talk about before, or since, and I think I'm the only guy that knows anything about it. But the name of the school was Dodar Training. And what they trained us to do, at the time I was still 17, 18 years old. I thought it was exciting. I think now back and I said, my God, was I going to do that? But what we were supposed to do, we had these receivers which were about, maybe a foot and a half long and circular, made out of a heavy metal. And with wires attached to them and back to a base, and we'd put 3 or 4 of those up and would hang them on trees or dig them in the ground. And the purpose of these was to pick up sniper fire or machine gun fire on the front lines, or a tank or a mortar going off, and we were supposed to pick them up. And in our training, the damn things were pretty damn accurate, and we were all excited. We had a Jeep and everything else. Each one of us with our receivers had these things, and our orders were that as soon as we finished this training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, we were to be transported immediately to San Francisco by the Army, and then the Navy was to send us to Pearl Harbor, and then we were to be assigned to an outfit in the Marine Corps, and the understanding was that we were going to be part of the invasion of Japan. And at this time, I still think that Harry Truman was a great guy for doing what he did to stop World War II. Just about the time we graduated, the war in the Pacific ended, and I was sent then to Quantico, Virginia, because I had what they said was a knowledge that no other Marines, or very few other Marines had, and we were sent to, and we taught it for a couple of months at Quantico, Virginia. Then I got discharged. They discharged me, and I came home, and as I stated before, I had quit high school to join the Marine Corps, and I had to go back to high school. And there were a remarkably large number of people in Watertown that had to go back to high school because we wouldn't be admitted to college, and we wanted to go to college. And just off the top of my head, Dickie Meehan went to high school. We went to Menton Hall, which is now a very selective prep school, which is in Harvard Square. But after World War II, they had expanded, and they had a big plant on Huntington Avenue in Boston. It was large. They must have had 3,000 or 4,000 kids in there. This small little prep school in Menton, but it was in Huntington Avenue in Boston. And Dickie Meehan, Donnie Anderson, myself, Freddie Nelson, a whole bunch of kids from Watertown. We had to go there and get our, we all had what they call war diplomas. It meant that if you joined the service, the town or the school would give you a diploma, but you hadn't earned the credits. So to get into college, you had to earn the credits. So we went back and we earned the credits. And I finished that, and I went back and I wanted to be a dentist. And with my educational background, Tufts and a few other schools kind of laughed at me. So I went to Suffolk and decided to thinking of becoming a lawyer. At that time, you only had to go to 2 years of law school. So I went to 2 years of law school, and 2 years of pre-law, and then the 3 years of law school. And I finished, I had another funny incident during that time to make extra money. We were all going on the GI Bill. The government was very, very good to us after the war, extremely good to us. And there would have been a whole generation that got education as a result of what the United States government did for us. And I went to college for 2 years, and I was acting like a lot of people, the young veterans. I was doing some crazy things and maybe not living the best life or what have you. And I was walking down the street, Tremont Street, one time in Boston, and I saw a recruiting sign to join the United States Army Air Force. And it was just at the cusp when the Air Force was going to divorce itself from the Army and become independent. They were right just about there. And I was living the kind of a wild life, and I was thinking that maybe I should get away from here. So I went in and I looked into joining the United States Army to become an aviation cadet. And I did join it. But I did one thing. I read the contract very, very closely. And the contract said that I was to be commissioned a lieutenant pilot upon my completion, satisfactory completion. And that I was to be discharged if I didn't. So I read the contract, and I went down to Perrin Air Base down in Texas. Perrin Field, I think was the name of it. And I had never been in an airplane in my life, and I had never even thought about airplanes, but I was really kind of getting away from what was going on with me in Boston. And I went down there, and lo and behold, I didn't mind flying. I flew, and I flew an AT-6, which is a pretty heavy airplane, an SNJ they called it in the Navy. And I flew that, and I got 19 hours in, and I soloed. And I also had applied for the law school. I had finished my 2 years of pre-law, and I had applied for Suffolk Law School. And I was thinking what I was going to do, and I decided that I didn't think that I wanted to be a pilot that much, so I left. I told them I no longer wanted to fly, and they were going to put me in the Army and all sorts of threats, and I made sure they read my contract, and my contract said I was to be discharged if I wasn't second lieutenant pilot, and I was discharged and went back to law school. And then I met my wife, and married, and continued on law school nights, but I couldn't get married unless I had a job, and I got a job in Watertown. My first job in Watertown was a social worker, working for the welfare department of the town of Watertown. And on the strength of that job, I had a job, and it was paying me the grand and glorious sum of $2,000 a year. Can you imagine that? And on the strength of $2,000 a year, I got married. My wife, Mary Regan, or Mary Teresa Regan, married. And my first home was, my father had moved out of West Watertown, and they lived on Russell Avenue at the time. And we had a nice big house on Russell Avenue, 49 Russell Avenue in Watertown. And they had a nice attic up there, and when we decided to get married, I went up to the attic, and with some friends, we did a lot of work, and we made a small apartment up in the attic. And I lived up in the attic with my wife for almost a year, and they were going to have a baby. And we got an apartment down on Morton Street in Watertown, 2729 Morton Street. The Pelletiers, great people. And I had my first two children there. And I continued on law school. I graduated law school. I passed the bar. And while I was going to law school, my senior year in law school, someone asked me or suggested to me that you get involved in politics. My father had been very much involved. My father was Packy Menton. He had been very much involved in politics. He had been a member of the school committee for many, many years in Watertown. He was a lawyer. And he was also a selectman in Watertown. And he was a Democrat. And he used to, when I was about in my early 20s, he would bring me to a couple of the town meetings, local Democratic town committee meetings. And I was at one of the meetings, and Watertown at that time was a Democratic community. It was a partisan town. And they suggested that I run for school committee, because at the time I had been a social worker, and then I had got a job in town with the Youth Service Board, and I was working with the Youth Service Board as a parole officer. And lo and behold, I ran for school committee, and lo and behold, I won. And I was elected to the school committee in Watertown. And I served on the school committee. I was a young man. It was very interesting. But it was a partisan election. It was altogether different than it is now. And the school committee did all the appointments. And it was very political at that time. And I served in the school committee about a year or so. And then I graduated from law school and passed the bar. And I was talking to an FBI agent, and I decided to make an application for the FBI, and I applied for the FBI, and I took all sorts of examinations, and I was interviewed and investigated, I guess, and lo and behold, they said I'd be a pretty good agent, so they hired me, and I became an FBI agent. And just an aside on that, I had three brothers, two older brothers and a younger brother, John. My older brother, Thomas, when I joined the FBI, about a year later, he decided to join the FBI. And my younger brother, who was not a lawyer, he graduated from Holy Cross, he also decided to become in the FBI. So at one time, there were three Menton boys in the FBI. And I went in the FBI, and my wife lived with, we gave up our house, and she lived with her family until we finished training. And the training for the FBI was, as I said before, was at Quantico. Very, very interesting, very good training. And they now have the new FBI Academy that I visited, but the old academy was right in the Marine Corps base and was part of the courses were very close to the Marine Corps in working on this thing. And my first office was Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. And I was there for about a little bit over about 2 years, and I ended up in what they call a resident agency, which means that you work out of the central city, and it was Ashland, Kentucky, which is in the far eastern part of Kentucky, right on the Ohio River, across from West Virginia in Ohio. And I worked there for a couple of years, and it was very, very interesting. It was out in the hills of Kentucky, and one of the funny things I can always remember about Kentucky was that Kentucky, is south, the Civil War, and the people in the western part of Kentucky were with the Confederates, and the people in the eastern part of Kentucky, their history, with the Yankees, the Union. And they have I guess there were more Confederacy people down there. But the legislature in Kentucky passed a bill making Jefferson Davis' birthday a state holiday. And it'd be very unique down there in Kentucky. You would see in the eastern part of Kentucky, people that never worked a day in their life would be out working to show that they weren't affiliated with the Confederacy, and the people, it was a big high holiday in the western part of the state. But then they transferred me to New York City. And New York City, an FBI, well, it was awful. I had to live down in New Jersey, and the commute was a good hour each day. Hour each way, and I was married and had 3 kids, and I just couldn't stomach it. So I decided to resign, and I resigned and came home and started practicing law. And I'm practicing law, and I thought I'd make $1 million right off the bat, and lo and behold, the people weren't lining up to see me. I was getting a little bit of business, but not much, and there was an election coming up. And there's an election for state representative, and someone suggested, "Why don't you run for state representative?" And it was still a partisan town. And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's a Republican district. I don't think I have much of a chance." And they said, "Well, try it." So I did, and I ran for representative and state representative. I ran against followed by Earl Tyler, who was a Republican minority leader in the House, and was a fine man. I'd gone to high school with his daughter. She was a good friend of mine. And I ran against him, and lo and behold, I went around campaigning, and I didn't have any money. And my strategy was I'd go door to door and speak to people, and I assumed that the Democrats would vote for me because I was a Democrat. And my best bet was to talk to Republicans, so I would be with people, and I would make sure that every Republican door I went to, I would talk to them, and I just didn't give them a card. I talked. And as you can see, I'm talking pretty good now, so I can talk pretty good when I get going. So I talked to them, and lo and behold, when election day came, I won the election by 13 votes. And then 2 years later, in the same district, a very good friend of mine, Mal Whitney, from Watertown, a good man, a real estate insurance man in Watertown, and 2 years later, he ran against me. And lo and behold, I did the same thing, and I think I won that election by 11 votes. And then 2 years later, I was now kind of senior in the legislature, and there was a redistricting going on, and we changed the district a little bit from a Republican district, and we made it kind of a Democratic district. And I ran that time, and I won very easily, and then 2 years later, or maybe it was that election or the election later, but then it became a two-man district, and I ran, and I won with a very good friend of mine, a fellow who's now deceased, Charlie Ohanian. I served in the legislature, I think it was 10 or 12 years, I'm not sure which. And I enjoyed it very, very much, and I was a group of mavericks in the legislature. We had a lot of fun, did a lot of things. Mike Dukakis was a very good friend of mine in the legislature who later ran for president. We were involved in the dispute with John Thompson, who was the Speaker of the House and kind of a tyrant at the time and was known at that time. And we were the kind of the young Turks, the young mavericks, and we did a lot of things. And in my legislative history, I am extremely proud of the fact that some of the constitutional amendments that are important for the state, like the 4-year term for governor, the lieutenant governor, governor running together as a team, home rule amendment, there was one other constitutional amendment. I was the first signer on all of them, got them started and got them going. And then I also was the prime mover in the first truth in lending piece of legislation in this country. And I was interviewed down in Washington and testified in the Congress. And it was very satisfying. I enjoyed it, and I think I enjoyed that part of my life, doing legislation. I can recall talking to my brother Tommy. My older brother Tommy was also a lawyer who had been in the FBI with me. And one time we were reminiscing, and Tom said, "You're not making an awful lot of money, but you seem to be enjoying yourself." And I said, "Yes, I am." I said, "I think that I'm getting more satisfaction out of what I'm doing than you are making all the money you're making." And he said he agreed with me. So we had, it was great. Then the elections were getting closer, and maybe I was getting lazier or getting older, but I decided not to run for re-election one year, and I was asked if I would become Associate House Counsel. And I said, yes, I'd do that, and I became Associate House Counsel, and I was working, reviewing all the legislation for its constitutionality and proper drafting and making sure that there was proper legislation and working with the people who would file and proposing the legislation and just making sure it was done right. And I did that for about 10 years, and that was very satisfying. And I enjoyed doing it, and I think I became a bit of an expert in legislation and the process of legislating. And then Michael Dukakis, who I had mentioned earlier, was governor, and we were talking one time, and I don't know whether let's say that I suggested, I said that I'd be a good judge someday, Mike, and Mike said, "I think you would. Why don't you make an application?" So I made an application, and I became a judge in the Cambridge District Court, and that was a fabulously enjoyable part of my life. In 10 years, I was a judge traveling around the state, and mostly in Cambridge, but around the state, and trying cases and jury cases in the district court, and all sorts of criminal cases. Completely enjoyable. Then when I was retired at age 70, which is mandatory in the state of Massachusetts, that was one of the constitutional amendments that I put through the legislature, forcing myself to retire at age 70. But when I became 70, I retired, and I had the good fortune that the chief administrative judge and the chief judge of the district courts asked me if I would come back and continue working as a recall judge. And I did that, and the beauty of that was that I had never sat in juvenile court, and they wanted me to sit mostly on juvenile matters, which I did do for the 3 years that I was in recall. And it was an education in and of itself to a new thing completely for me, working in the juvenile area. So I was 3 years as a recall juvenile judge. Then I retired for good. I've been a very fortunate young man, and I'm still consider myself young at the age of 77. But I've enjoyed everything I've done in my life, even the Marine Corps. And every job I've had I've enjoyed, and I felt that I got something out of. But looking back in life, you consider and you think about things, and you think, and I many times come back thinking about a fellow by the name of Bob Ford. And Robert Ford lived in Watertown. He was went to Watertown High School with me. He lived down around St. Patrick's, around Green Street area. And he remembered the Longtail Ford family in Watertown. And he was a pretty good little lad, a good baseball player. And he had what they called a hook arm. And the hook arm, as we all know, that you'd be standing and his right hand would, the palm would be facing outward rather than inward. And as a result of that, he was 4F during much of the war. He had tried to enlist in the service, but he was 4F. And I look and I think about this, and I was 3 years in the Marine Corps. And most Marines had real serious situations, and many Marines died, were seriously injured. But this Bobby Ford, who was 4F during much of the war, all of a sudden, I guess the United States needed some bodies for the invasion. I think it was Anzio in Italy. And he was changed from 4F to A1, I guess, classified. And he was drafted. And this poor young man, who, as I say, was one of my closest friends growing up in high school, was drafted. And he wasn't in the Army. He went down, I think, Fort Dix, is from what I was told. And he wasn't in the Army any more than 8 to 10 weeks. And he was over on the beaches of Anzio and dead. And you look at how God, or how the world, how things happen. I'm over 3 years in the Marine Corps, and he's 8 to 10 weeks in the Army, and he's dead, and I'm still alive. And I wonder, and you just wonder about things. But I've been repeating myself. I've been very fortunate. I was fortunate to have a great family. My mother and father were the most tremendous people I've had, and as a parent, I hope that I've in some way emulated what they did for myself and my brothers when we were growing up, for my kids. And I was, again, fortunate to marry a beautiful woman from Dorchester. And she, a funny aside, that as in the beginning I told you that I worked with a bunch of guys. We worked over at Boston State Hospital. And my wife was a nurse, and she was my boss at Boston State Hospital. And many times we joke about who was the patient, and at Boston State it was a mental hospital, and at that time. But she was my boss, and she's been my partner, and anything that's ever happened in my life I dedicate, and I look to her for the results. She has been the greatest helpmate that a man could ever have. And again, repeating myself, I think I've enjoyed my life in Watertown immensely. She teases me that I wouldn't move out of Watertown. I'd move out of Watertown if I found someplace better, but I really haven't found any place better yet.